Hello everyone, welcome to 929 Chapters. I'm your host, David Z. Moster, PhD and Rabbi. Let's begin our overview of Genesis chapter 1. Today we're going to break it up into 4 parts, a summary, an outline of the chapter, some select verses, and a photo to leave you with. So let's begin with the summary. Genesis chapter 1 is basically the story of the creation of the entire world. The way creation occurs is God speaks. Yahweh is God here, but he's called only Elohim, a point which will be important later on. And so the main chapter is the first 6 days of creation. What ends up is that at the end, God blesses man with dominion over that creation. And anytime you have a text that is kind of describing a physical world, a physical picture, it's very difficult to kind of imagine that in our own minds. But many people have tried to put Genesis 1 onto the paper to kind of give us a view. So here what we're looking at is the first chapter, Genesis 1, understood in the 1800s by a person named Whitehouse. And what you see here is that you have your main earth surrounded by the heavens, which are in a dome. And then above that is some waters, and then below that is some more waters. So this is kind of a picture you get from Genesis 1. Here's a more modern picture of Genesis 1, put iconographically. And what we're looking at here is the same concept where you have Earth right in the middle, and above it is the sky, then the sun, the moon, the stars, then firmament, which in Hebrew is called rakia, and above that is the water. And then there are oceans on the side and below. What I think the best picture I found online for this biblical cosmology of Genesis 1 is from a website called The Bible Project. And the reason I like this picture is because it actually explains how the world was created in Genesis 1 by also showing you the time, the day that it took to create. So let's take a look at the top. Day 1, when God created light and darkness. Then all of a sudden on day 2, God created and separated the waters above, which would have been the rain, the snow, and the sleet and the ice. So the heavenly waters from the lower waters, which would have been the oceans. It could have also been there's waters underneath the land also. So there's up waters and low waters. Then on day 3, God separated the land from the sea. So we have the oceans and then we have land. And on day 4, God created that firmament, that rakia, a dome. And this dome separated the waters from the top and the bottom. It basically held up the high waters. Other biblical passages will describe the windows of the firmament. And so those windows, when they open up, down will come the rain. Oh, also on day 4, you get your sun, your moon, your stars. Then on day 5, we get the sea creatures, especially the giants and the taninim below, and we get the flying creatures above. And then on day 6, what we get is everything on land itself. You get the humans. On day 7, which isn't in this chapter, God is going to rest. So that concludes our summary. So now let's move on to the outline. Genesis 1 is very easy to break up into 6 sections because there are 6 days. What we're looking at here are the 6 days of the first week of creation. The first 5 verses, you get the first day, light and darkness, night and day. The second day, the sky, as we mentioned. The third day, land and sea, and also the vegetation. On the 4th day, you get your sun, moon, and stars. On the 5th day, your sea monsters, crawling sea creatures, and birds of the sky. On the 6th day, you get your land animals, men and women, and perhaps most importantly, you get the blessing to man and woman that they are in charge of all the animals. One of the cool things about Genesis 1 is that it is very structured, which means that it's very easy to break up the 6 days one from the other. And the reason that this is because after each day is this stock phrase. It only appears here in Genesis 1, but it appears 6 times. Vayhi erev, vayhi voker, yom echad. It was night, and then the next morning came, vayhi voker. That concludes the first day. And then in verse 8, vayhi erev, vayhi voker, yom sheni. The night fell, and then the sun rose. That concludes the second day. Vayhi erev, vayhi voker. It was night. The next morning came. The third day, so on and so forth. So it's very easy to break up the chapter. Whereas other biblical chapters, there's a lot going on. It's unclear where to start and where to stop. Here, it's very clear where to start and where to stop. Parenthetically, in the 1200s, when the chapters as we understand them were broken up, the reason why they probably stopped here is because you have these Vayhi Erevs, Vayhi Boker. They stopped on the 6th day, but on the 7th day, we don't have this phrase. So that appears in the second chapter. But really, if it were up to me, the first chapter would actually end at Genesis 2, verse 4, where we have the end of the Sabbath day, the seventh day. Okay, so that's the outline of our chapter. And before we move on, I just want to point out an interesting thing about the sun, moon, and stars. In verses 14 to 16, it actually says explicitly why God created the sun, the moon, and the stars. The first reason is basically a calendar. Vayomer Elohim Yihim Orot Berakia Hashamayim. And God said, let there be lights in the physical dome of the heavens, Lahavdil ben hayom uvein halayla, to separate between night and from day, Vahayu leotot ulemoadim uleyamim vishanim, and let them be for signs of time, and moadim, appointed times, and for days and for years. On the one hand, the moon is perhaps the most important for this. Based on the waxing and waning of the moon, we can tell what day of the month it is. The lunar month was how you calculated the days. But then also, as the earth would progress around the sun, and I'm not saying this is how Genesis understood the astronomy, but basically you get summer solstice, winter solstice, and the sun rises to the height of the sky and goes to the bottom of the sky, and these separate the seasons one from the other. And then also you get special events, and these are probably the otot, those signs, such as maybe a solar eclipse or a red moon or a blue moon or, the sighting of Venus and Saturn and so on and so forth. So that's the reason why God created the sun, moon, and stars. Well, that's the first reason. And then the second reason is the more obvious reason, is we need light. Basically, the light in the heavens. V'hayu limorot birkia hashamayim, and these lights should be in the solid of the sky. Laha'ir al haaretz, to give light to the land. And it was so. Now what I want to do is I feel it's always important to at least read some of the chapter itself. So we're going to read perhaps the most famous verses in the entire Bible, Genesis 1 to 5. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the sky and the earth. V'haaretz haita tohu vavohu, v'choshech al pnei tehom. And the land was completely void and empty, and there was darkness on the face of the deep. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim. And the Spirit of God was hovering on the water. Vayomer Elohim yihi or vayhi or. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. Vayar Elohim et ha'or ki tov. And God saw that the light was good. Vayavdel Elohim bein ha'or uvein hachoshech, and God separated between light and between darkness. Vayikra Elohim la'or yom v'lachoshech kara layla, and God called light day, and he called darkness night. Vayhi erev, vayhi voker, it was nighttime. The next morning came Yom Echad, the first day. These are good verses to know. They're definitely up there in terms of the most well-known verses in the entire Hebrew Bible. And so what I want to leave you with is a photo. The photo I chose for this chapter to keep it in our minds, fresh in our minds, was based on the blessing to man in verse 29, when God says, see, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth, and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. So here, God is basically giving man every growing thing to eat. So for more on this chapter, including an analysis of that word, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker, in the Jewish tradition, as well as how this chapter relates to the documentary hypothesis, please see my website, 929chapters.com, and check out Genesis 1. Also, if you have any comments or questions, leave them in the comments section below, and I'll have links to all the cosmology images that I had at the beginning. Thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you for Genesis chapter 2.